Hey, what's up everybody out there? This is Joe Garcia with CyberArk here to show you today how to install, set up, configure, and test CyberArk's Application Access Manager centralized credential provider. The centralized credential provider allows you to use either SOAP or REST API calls in order to securely deliver to your applications or automation scripts secrets, credentials, SSH keys, whatever it is you're storing in our enterprise password vault that you want to keep safe and secure, as well as under management, of course. So today I'm going to be setting this up for a video I'm going to do a little bit later, and I do need the centralized credential provider for that. So I've got in my lab a Server 2016 VM up and running with my Password Vault web access, as well as my Central Policy Manager installed here. So what I'm going to do is also install, since IIS is already here, and that's a prerequisite to installing the centralized credential provider, I'm going to install it here just to keep everything in one place, make it a little bit easier on myself. So I did download the version 1010 release of our centralized credential provider from our support vault. If you're an existing customer today and you have a license for the centralized credential provider, you can find it in the PAS solution folder that is shared with you there in the support vault. If you are an existing customer and you don't have a license, you will need some additional line items on your license in order to use this. Reach out to your CyberArk account team, and they, I'm sure, would be more than happy to help you out. And if you're just checking this out to see what we have to offer and how complex the installation is, you'll see that it's really not. So I've already taken the liberty of unpacking it into this folder here. So we're going to have to run two different types of installations here. The first one is going to install the central credential provider for Windows, and then the second one that we're going to run is going to install the web service and configure it in IIS locally here. So in order to kick off the central credential provider for Windows, I'm just going to right-click Run as Administrator on that setup executable there. And we're going to be greeted with our awesome install wizard. So, it'll go through the typical next flow of things, starting with, obviously, accepting the end user license agreement. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll register it to myself here. And then I'm going to keep all of the default values. So typical, same, destination folder. It'll go ahead, it'll install locally, and then it's going to ask me for the IP address to my primary vault so that it can make a connection and deal with the vault environment there that it needs to set up, a couple users, things like that. So I'm going to give it the IP address where my vault lives in this lab environment. I'm not going to change the port. We're going to keep that private ARK protocol good. And it's going to need my administrator password. So I'm going to provide it with that. This is the user, the administrator user that you created a password for when you initially deployed the privileged account security solution in your environment. Everybody should know what that built-in administrator account is. However, if for whatever reason you're not given access to that information, you can use a Vault administrator's username and password. However, it should be CyberArk authentication and not LDAP authentication. So we'll go ahead and continue. It'll update our Vault environment, create the service, kick it off, and then we should be good to go. So now we have a service running here for our credential provider, but we need to get that web service set up in IIS. So I'm going to go back a notch, come into the web service, and same thing, I'm going to run as administrator on this setup.exe. And here I'm going to keep all of the typical values. I'm going to use the default website site. I'm going to keep the name AIM Web Service. However, if you do change this virtual directory name, you will need to make those changes in the path of the URL that you're targeting when you're trying to request a credential using the GET method over the REST API. And then the application pool, I'm going to keep the same as well. So we'll go ahead and just install it all there, and it'll get set up in IIS and get running. So it's as easy as that to get our central credential provider up and running on the Windows machine. Let's go ahead now and flip over to my other desktop here, and then I'm going to bring over a tab from my browser, and then we'll use this to log into my password vault located at components.cybr.dev. This will take a second to load. I think it's going to redirect me to LDAP authentication method because I have that set as my default. And then we'll go ahead and log in as me. So, okay. So it actually went to CyberArk authentication, which is fine. But I'm going to log in with an LDAP account. And the reason that this is going to work is because in my PVWA's options, I've configured under the general settings for authentication method, I've turned on and enabled what's called Smart Logon. And what that allows you to do is use an LDAP account or a CyberArk authentication account on either of those authentication methods, and then the password vault itself will make a smart decision on which authentication method route it's going to go. So it'll try CyberArk authentication. If that doesn't work, it'll revert to LDAP authentication, and then hopefully that works, right? Hopefully it's one of the two. So I'm going to put in my LDAP credentials here, click sign in, and I should get in. See, there's no delay or latency or anything like that when you have the smart logon on. I'm going to choose an account real quick that I want to use. So today I've already got our testing set up and stuff from a previous test. So I'm not going to have to change anything. But what I'm going to be using today is Stan Marsh, his account, his admin account. He's a Windows admin in my in my lab environment. So he has an ADM account, that admin account that he uses for privilege escalation. And if we take a look at the value I'm going to be using, I like using when I'm dealing with any of our application access manager solutions, I like using what we call the object name. When you're looking at the account details, it's actually this name value here. The reason that I like using that is because, first of all, you can make it whatever you want. If you allow our password vault by default to auto-generate that name, it's going to take on this format. It's going to be, the platform, the address, the username, what type of platform is it. This is an operating system platform. So all of these values will be automated. The key about this name value, though, is that it must be unique. So I can target solely this and know that there is no other account object in my password vault that has that same name. It's a unique identifier. And the other benefit too is that I don't have to allow it to use this name. I can customize that name as well. So I can obscure the name as much as I want. Obviously, I don't ever feel comfortable having just the usernames here as well as the platform that's managing it, or even the address sometimes, because this would be in plain text in my application scripts or my application source code, and it's just giving an attacker way too much information to work with. Sure, we don't give them the password, but now I know that I can look specifically for an ADM Stan account, and it is a domain account that I can use now to possibly laterally move throughout the environment, right? I got all that just from that automatically generated name. So changing this to be something, some sort of system or naming convention that you understand but would be hard for an attacker or an outsider to decipher is probably the best route. And then at the end of the day, this is all you're providing to the developer when they're building their application source code for them to be able to grab that credential. It's not something that they can walk away with, that they could leak out to GitHub in the open source source control managements that are available publicly, or the one thing that I see a lot is people going to Stack Overflow and asking questions, taking snippets of code and pasting it there because they have a question about their code, and lo and behold, it's a secret or possibly a little bit more information about the environment they're working in than they should have put up on Stack Overflow. So a lot of things to think about from a security perspective, and so I like using an obscured name in order to deal with my central credential provider or just my agent-based credential provider pools. Just added security there. So anyways, we're going to be pulling back this account from our domain admin safe. And but first we need to set up a couple application IDs. We got to set up some identities for our applications. If I search, we should not come back with anything because this is fresh. So the first one we're going to need to create by clicking the Add Application button is called AIM Web Service, the name of the virtual directory we chose when we set up the AIM web service, right? The web service that the CCP will use. We can fill out additional information. I'm not going to in my lab environment. I do, however, for just the ease of my viewing through CyberArk client, if I'm looking at the users there, I like to stick all of my application IDs in the applications location because then that kind of gets it out of the way of when I'm searching for a user, and I know that all of my AIM-based application stuff is in the applications location there. So I can always collapse or expand that section as I see fit. The AIM web service app ID in this instance is going to be what authenticates and allows the web service itself to be able to access the safe, to list safe members and things like this. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the AIM web service. And it's going to ask us for some authentication types. We're just going to set up allowed machines. So we're going to whitelist the IP address that I just installed that web service on, which happens to be the component's IP address, which is here. I can provide the hostname, DNS, FQDN, what have you. I stick with IPs. That's just my preference. You can always back it up with additional values as well if you feel the need to. So that's set. That's all I'm going to do there. I'm going to click Add Application to add another application. This is going to be the application ID that I'm going to be using when I want to fetch the credential now. So we've got the CCP web service set up and authenticated with a whitelisted IP address where it lives. Now I'm going to provide a whitelisted IP for where my automation script is going to be running from at the end of the day. Whether that's an automation server, an automation server, or your workstation or whatever. So I'm just going to name this application ID REST API. I'm going to be using it in another video in the future, so I want to make sure that I have something that makes sense there, and then I'm going to stick it in applications because I'm just OCD like that. So we'll go ahead and add this. Allowed machines, I'm going to add my IP address of my MacBook here that we're recording from. That will be this IP address. Hopefully it hasn't changed. And so we should be able now with this to start to set up our safe members on the safe we want to access. So nothing else needs to be done here. We've got both of those set up. So now if we go to policies, we flip over to access control to get to our safes. And then I'm going to select the safe that our ADM Stan user account is under. I'm going to click members to make changes to those. So you can see I already have some of my role groups here from Active Directory applied with their different permissions. I use a naming convention of safe name underscore role. So I have an admin and auditors and a users security group with the proper permissions that both should be having in a least privileged manner. Password manager is always going to have all access to any of the safes that you are managing accounts in. Because that is the account that deals with the rotation and the management, verification, all of that is going to be the password manager. We're going to add a couple members here. We're going to add those application IDs. So first and foremost, we made AIM web service, so I can search for AIM web, come up with that. And we're just going to allow it to have the default settings with one extra one added on here, access safe without confirmation. Go ahead and add that. And then for the next one, so that access safe without confirmation, the reason that I do that typically is because when we're dealing with automation and we need something to just like pull a credential, we want to keep things flowing and moving in the right direction. If we were to check mark later on down the road, right, on this account or on the safe, the need to authorize account requests, that's essentially putting in a manual gateway where someone's going to have to approve access to those credentials going forward. And in an automated world, manual gateways become a bear. And we don't want our automation to suffer the setbacks of having to wait for a human to wake up if it happens in the middle of the night, or finally see their email and the millions of emails that they had because they were stuck in meetings all day or something like that. We can just access the safe without confirmation, bypass all of that because we know it's programmatic access, and carry on with our lives. So the next, I need to add the REST API app ID because I need access to the safe too in order to retrieve the secrets. So I'm going to add that. And then there's one other user that we need to add for access. And this is one that people always forget when they're configuring the safe members on safes. And that is our provider user. This is a user that was created when we installed the CCP, that credential provider for Windows, on the server. It creates what's called a provider user, and the naming convention starts with PROV_. So you can search for that in the vault, and it'll come back with all of the host names that you've installed a credential provider on. In my case, I only have one out there, the central credential provider. So I come back with components, which is the host name of my components VM. So we'll select that. We'll give it the same default stuff, access safe without confirmation, yada, yada. We'll go ahead and add that and then close this out. It'll refresh and we've got our users there ready to go. So with all of that done, we're finally at a point where we can test. And there's a couple different ways we can test. The first way that we can test is by browsing to a URL that allows us to find out if the web service just works at all for AIM. And so in my case, that would be components of cyber.dev/AIM web service /v1.1/AIM.asmx. Okay, and so we get this web page here. It says AIM service get password. So if I was using SOAP, for example, I can come here and get an example request of what it looks like in the different versions of SOAP. However, I don't use SOAP. I use REST. Why not? It's there. It's easier. So we know that the AIM web service is up and running, and we can hit it. So what we can do now is use Postman in order to go ahead and give it a test. So as far as Postman is concerned, I use the application locally, but our documentation is posted live on Postman's website as well, and I'll show you that. So I have the collection here. They call it collections when you have a grouping of REST API methods. And this contains all of the different groupings of all of the REST API endpoints we have in our management API today. To get to this, you can get to it two ways. The easiest way is obviously, hey, just search Google for CyberArk REST API and look, there it is, top result, right, on Postman. You can get to it that way. And then once you get here, you get a nice collection here of community tools, code examples, the YouTube videos playlist that this video will be posted on here shortly. And then you can click through and see all the different folders and get the information right here straight on the website. Now, if you want to run it in the application and run some tests on it like I'm about to do, you would click Run in Postman up here in the corner. And it'll open up and say Postman for Windows if you're on Windows, Postman for Mac for me because I'm on my MacBook. If you don't have the app, you can click Get the App in order to download it. It'll take you to the download page. And then once you download and install that application, you can then go ahead and click here to load the collection and import it directly into your client. I'm not going to click it. I already have the collection. But just in case you're trying to get started for the first time, that's a quick rundown of what you can do, and then we have all the status codes here for you as well. All right, so into Postman, all of these different endpoints that are here, we're using the central credential provider's get password endpoint today, but you can click this title on anything and see what our SDK guide gives you as far as information. So you can see there's a lot more than what we're going to be using today for you to be able to query off of, but we're going to be making it very simple today. As you can see, we're using URL parameters and we're using a get method as well. This is all built in and already set up for you once you import the collection from Postman. What you might not recognize are these little squiggly brackets that have variables in between them. And these denote environment variables in Postman. Environment variables come in very handy when you have something that you need to use repeatedly throughout here, such as a session token or a username and a password or something like that. So when you import the collection from Postman, you're also going to get a template environment, an environment template along with it. And that environment template basically allows you to click this eyeball up here, and you'll see all the different variables with their initial value for, like, to give you an idea of what it could look like or what it could be. And then the current value can be changed by you. I've already changed a couple values to my environment, so I've got my components URL set up here for the base URL. As far as the safe, I have the safe updated to be that dwin domain admin safe. I have my app ID set up for REST API. The folder will always be root when we're dealing, or when we're being asked for a folder. You will know if you've changed the folder because you will have to actually manually nest these password objects into that folder. If you're not dealing with that, or you don't even know what I'm talking about, use root. Everything by default will go there. And then the object name that I showed you and we talked about a little bit earlier, I went ahead and set that up under object name too. And so you can see I have the parameters all listed out here, and if we hover over them, we can see REST API, we can see their current values, the safe, the folder, root. All of that is good. The headers are already configured the way we need them to be. The parameters are already configured. Once you set up that environment template to have the proper values for what you're trying to test out, you can go ahead and click send. And it's as easy as that. We get back the content. So this is the password of that account. It's under management, so it's a little randomized there. We get the extra pass 3 name, so I can see that there's a CyberArk reconcile account assigned to it. I get how many retries there were. The creation method, I made this directly through the PVWA. It wasn't automatically onboarded or anything like that. You get all of the account information as well as the content, which is the most important part, right? That's the password or the SSH key or what have you. That's always going to come over on content. The only other portion that I want to point out to you guys is the password change in process. So if this is ever marked as true, that means that password's about to change. The password manager has checked out the account. It's in the middle of trying to make that password change. Your application happened to just pull it at that time. And so you'll want to kind of hold off for a second there if that comes over as true, and then keep checking for it to move back to false so that you know you have updated password and that it's going to be good until your next password change process is. But as far as the central credential provider is concerned, we've gotten back our credential information over the REST API. We installed it, we configured it in the PVWA, we've got all of the safe permissions set up, and I think we made pretty good time on that. That's not so complex, is it? So hopefully this helped you out. I'd love to hear in the comments if you did, and look out for my next video where we're actually going to be hitting the central credential provider and showing some best practices on how to utilize what returns in PowerShell. Thank you all, and I will see you soon.